こんにちは皆さん、ビジネスサクセスジャパンのポッドキャストへようこそ。Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Business Success Japan podcast. This is your host, Liddy Buchelman. My main goal here is to create an easily accessible resource for those who want to develop Japan-specific communication skills, especially in business. While I can't and won't promise to make you fluent in Japanese, I hope that you will walk away from each episode with a skill, piece of information, or shift in mindset that will help you be more effective in your interactions with Japanese business people. But before we get started today, I wanted to quickly let you know about a free resource that I made for people who want to study Japanese on their own. I put together a cheat sheet for the people at a client company to use so that they could start or continue their language studies, and I wanted to make it available to any listener who might be interested as well. Just contact me through the email in the description of this episode, and I'll get you the link. It's nothing fancy, but it should be useful if you're looking for a little bit of guidance or structure for learning Japanese. And now, before we get into today's episode, let's quickly go over some Japanese. In the last episode, we learned a phrase that's particularly useful when traveling in Japan, since it's asking how much it would cost to get somewhere. The structure is place, made, ikura desu ka? Place, ma, de, I, ku, ra, de, su, ka. Place made ikura desu ka? So if you needed to know how much it costs to get to the hotel, you could say, hoteru made ikura desu ka? This week, I'll teach you a useful phrase for eating in Japan. It's a set phrase that you say before you eat your meal, like bon appetit in French or eight smaklek in Dutch. In Japan, you would say, いただきます。いただきます。いただきます. Because this phrase can be translated as, I humbly accept, you may hear variations of this phrase in other contexts as well. And since it's a humble phrase, you'll hear this phrase or some variation of it used quite frequently in a business context. So today I have the privilege of sharing my conversation with Faye, a Japanese teacher, or sensei, based in Michigan. She has experience living and working in Japan, as well as working with students who then go on to have their own Japan experiences. We talk quite a bit about culture shock and learning and growing through intercultural experiences. So I think that this episode will be particularly useful for listeners who may be going on longer trips to the country or are planning to live there in the future for any length of time. However, we had such a great conversation that I think anyone with any amount of interest in Japan will enjoy it. So let's get into today's interview. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today I have another great interview for you with Faye Valtadoros. If you wouldn't mind just quickly introducing yourself to my audience, Faye.
Good morning. My name is Faye Valtadoros. I am born and raised in Michigan. I grew up in a Greek household. So this is back 70s, 80s. Basically, my house was like a Greek household. We spoke Greek at home. We went to Greek school. I went to public school here in Michigan. And to me, that was my life. That's what I knew. I knew that I would go to school, speak English, and I would come home, go to Greek school, and speak Greek. And to me, that was normal, although I sometimes felt that people didn't find that to be normal at the time. Yes, that's the beginning of my life.
So then how did you end up getting involved with Japan?
I went to Utica schools, and they were the first school in Michigan to start a Japanese program. And I was like, okay, whatever, I'll take French. Well, my mom's like, no, you're taking Japanese. And I was like, no, I'm just going to take French. And she said, right now, because it was the big Japan boom at the time. This is in the late 80s. And she said, this is going to be an important language for you to learn. And you already are bilingual, so you already have the skills to learn another language. So I took it because you never say no to your Greek mother. And because she made me take it, I did not like it. I didn't want to like it. But I took it. And I I'm more so, I definitely failed it because I didn't want to be in there and she made me take it. Um, my school had a sister school in Japan, and I went after I graduated my senior year, and I just fell in love with it. It was such a different world. I mean, I knew American lifestyle, and I'd been to Greece many times. So I knew the Greek lifestyle, I knew the American lifestyle, but I knew nothing about Japan and their lifestyle and what the country was like. And it was from that moment, it was like an aha moment. I was like, wow, I kind of like this language. I love this country. And I came back having an appreciation for it.
Yeah, that sounds like such a good experience. So, when you were learning Japanese, did they just not really cover anything about the country itself? Did they not focus on the culture and kind of the unique aspects of the country that you were so surprised when you actually got there?
So when they started the program, it was the first program of its kind for Japanese. So for starters, they had my first couple Japanese language instructors were actually Chinese ladies, um, and their focus was the language, and they did not talk about the culture. Um, but the textbook back then was nowhere near what we have today, or what we would have needed back then to learn grammar or anything. We did have Van Camp, who taught like the social studies part, and yeah, he talked about it a little bit, but I guess compared to today, like how I teach it or how I see other teachers teaching it, there's so much more that we teach about culture, because to learn a language, you need to know the culture. And I don't know if they realized that back then. I mean, we're talking almost 30 years now. So I don't feel that I knew a lot about the culture, that I learned a lot about the culture before I went to Japan.
Yeah, so then you mentioned that you're teaching now. So what exactly are you doing now with Japanese?
So after I graduated, I went to Eastern Michigan University and got my teaching degree in Japanese language and culture. And I went on the JET program. I lived in Japan for a couple of years, came back, and I have been teaching Japanese for 20 years. I now teach grades 6 through 12. So I do 10-week classes for the 6th and 7th grade students just to get them interested. And then starting in 8th grade, it's a year-long program. It's the credit courses. And yeah, it's what I do. I teach Japanese and I love it.
So since you loved Japan so much, you stayed for 2 years and you told me earlier that you just
Mhm.
really enjoyed where you were at. What kind of made you decide to come back and share Japan instead of staying in Japan as an English teacher? What was kind of part of that decision-making process for you?
Although I loved the JET program and I loved where I was in the countryside. It was a little town of like 14,000 people and nobody spoke English.
Hmm.
Even better for me.
Yes.
Um, you could probably understand where I'm coming from, right? At that time.
Hmm.
But I wanted to get on with my career here. When you think about getting a career, you're talking retirement plans, you're talking 403Bs, IRAs. And I knew I had to. I mean, I was in what, 25, so I knew I had to get that started. So I 2 years was good,
Hmm.
but I had to start my career here.
So then in your time in Japan, I guess which aspect did you find that you loved or admired the most about Japan as a country? It can be something big or just something really small.
Oh,
It's a really
that's a
hard
good
question.
question. Yeah, because there's just so much. Um, Japanese people are so friendly and so helpful. I did a study abroad when I was in college for a year, and I was down on the island of Shikoku, and we used to take a boat from Shikoku to Kobe, and then from there we'd go into Osaka and hang out for the weekend. and then take the ship back to Shikoku. Well, one night I was on my own. Somehow I had gotten away from my friends and I had gone to the wrong port.
Mm.
And I had to get on that next ship because I had to work. It was a work study. And these two ladies not only gave me directions, they took me to the port that I had to be at.
Mm-hmm.
And that just was so kind, and that's just how they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're just so friendly and so helpful. And even though my Japanese at that time was okay, they were just amazing. And they love to speak English with you. If they can do it, they will speak English with you. But they definitely love it when you speak Japanese, but they're just so helpful. And another aspect about Japan that I love is the history. They just have such a deep, deep history, and I love it.
Yeah, I have a lot of stories like that too, where people just go so far out of their way to help you. But
Yeah.
I had a similar experience in Tokyo, which if you talk to expats in Japan, they'll be like, oh, they're so much less friendly than other parts of Japan. But you forget that they're still a lot more helpful than many
Yes.
other places in the world. Just having people literally see you look confused, walk up
Right.
to you, ask you what you
Yep.
need, and then not only help you, but will literally run around the station getting you
Yes.
all the help you need, making sure that you
Yep.
end up where you need to go. It's just
Yep.
very amazing. I definitely admire that part of Japan.
Yeah.
So, can you tell me a little bit about the students you teach? Why do they choose to study Japanese? Kind of what's their motivation? Do they seem to maintain their interest or does it kind of fade away with time or is it just a completely mixed bag?
So a lot of my students, I can't say for all, but a lot of them start because they are reading manga and watching anime, which we didn't have that when I was growing up, when I was taking Japanese. So I compare the manga to comic books. I read comic books. They read their manga. Good
Hmm.
for them. That's how it starts. But I think when they start taking the class and are able to connect what they've learned on their own with what I've taught them, it's like they get to fill in the blanks of things they were not aware of. So I do start pretty strong. So Japanese 1, Japanese 2, good sized classes. And it does thin out, but only because kanji
Yeah.
it's a beast.
Yeah. It's never not a beast.
I've got a good amount of students that do stay on, that have just fallen in love with the language and the culture. I also have a sister school in Japan, in Chiba,
Mhm.
and they come every March. They come for 1 week. They do presentations in English on Japanese culture,
Oh, wow.
lifestyle, history, and my students host them in their houses. And that 1 week, it's a busy week for me, but it's so amazing to see these connections that these kids are making. Just because they're living halfway across the world from each other does not mean that they're completely different people. They have so much in common,
Hmm.
and the friendships that are created is just amazing. I've got students who 14 years still keep in touch with the student they hosted. And then every other year we go to Japan, and same thing. My students do presentations in Japanese to them on American lifestyles, holidays, food, stuff like that. It's a great unique exchange program.
Yeah, that sounds like an incredible way to get people to have a more sustained interest in the country because with
Yes.
time you
Yep.
can lose some of the
Yep.
initial motivations. But if you have
Yep.
friends, then yeah, your motivation lasts as long as your relationships do,
Right.
if not longer.
Right.
That's awesome.
Right.
Were you involved with helping set that up or?
Funny story. I had just started working in where I work, and um, I just got this email one day from this teacher in Japan introducing himself and saying, we've been doing this exchange for so many years with your predecessor. Are you interested in continuing it? And I didn't hesitate. I said, yeah, let's do it. I didn't know it was involved. And I like to think that it's improved. We start off with 10 students, and now we're up to 16.
Oh, wow.
And it's gotten better. Yeah, I mean, just like anything else does, as you learn things, just improve. Although this year does mark our 20-year anniversary, they were not able to come.
Yeah.
Go figure. A year of an anniversary. But hopefully next year we can celebrate with them.
Yeah, there's unfortunately a lot of those exchanges being put on pause, but
yeah,
there's not much you can do about it, unfortunately.
Nope.
So then you put in all this effort into cultivating curiosity and teaching students about Japan. So kind of why do you think Japan is such an important country for your students to be engaged with? Because you hear a lot about people who are like, oh no, everybody needs to learn Spanish. Oh no, everybody needs to learn Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, because of X numbers of people speak these languages. But why is Japan such an important country, in your opinion?
You're right. I hear this a lot. Everybody's going to speak Spanish. Everybody understands Spanish. Well, not quite. Let's just look at Michigan alone. We have 500 some Japanese companies that employ Americans that speak Japanese, even that don't speak Japanese. And so in the state of Michigan, I think it is so important for us to keep programs like this because this is our future. These Japanese companies, because we have the big three here, are so important to Michigan. Therefore, my students who are going to go to college and learn Japanese and hopefully one day become a jet and live in Japan, come back and work for these Japanese companies. That's what you need. Now, as a nation, we have such a strong bond with Japan. And we're talking technology, automobile, game station, PlayStation, and all that stuff. Like, there's just so much that we give each other as countries, and we need to keep that relationship strong.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you 100%. Say recently there seems to be kind of more of a sentiment about like countries like South Korea and Japan being rivals, but it's really it's a positive rivalry. It's like we make each other better through friendship and through also kind of trying to duke it out over technology and advance. So it's not so just thinking about those countries as rivals really doesn't do that relationship any justice, in my opinion. You've lived abroad in Japan for a fair amount of time total. And could you tell us a little bit about your experience with culture shock?
So for me, because I had my first time to Greece was when I was 10 years old. So I've kind of been traveling since I was a kid and just gotten used to not having my family with me. But I do remember on the jet program, when the honeymoon phase is over, right? When everything, oh, I love where I live. I have a great apartment. I'm gonna make lots of friends, but then you hit like a dip. And I did miss my family for a minute there because back then, this is like 98 to 2000, I was on jet. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have the social media that we have today. Internet was still, the hardwire internet, and it was hard to keep in touch, but I dealt with it by my family sent me gift boxes of like American foods, keeping in touch on the phone. I remember back then I would make videos and email it to them. But aside from that, I started taking karate. I was teaching an adult class once a night, an English class. I made friends. I went out. You have to get out there. I played roller hockey with the ski team. You have to get involved. You have to stay involved because otherwise you're going to be cooped up in your house. Woe is me. I'm so sad. I miss home. I miss my dog. But you have to realize that you're safe in a great country, and you need to take the most of it, like as much as you can, and just take it all in and do what you can. Get out there and experience new things.
Yeah, so it sounds like one of those situations where the more you put in, the more you get out of it.
Yeah.
And after being there for a little bit of a longer time, after the honeymoon phase and getting
Yep.
super involved with everything, did you find yourself getting a little bit burnt out on all of the cultural differences? Just because, while, like you said, it's not like Japanese people are fundamentally different than anybody else. It's just that there are a lot of cultural nuances that are quite a bit different. Did you experience any sort of burnout over time from that?
Not burnout necessarily. For me, it was more like, wow, this is really different from America. I remember their garbage pickup in Japan is very different.
Oh, yes.
You've got your garbage, like your burnable, and then you have, your magazines, your newspaper, your plastic, your glass, and that's a separate recycling. And again, I was in the countryside. I remember I had thrown an aerosol can away, and
Mm,
on the garbage bags that were white, we had to put our name on them. And my neighbor saw that I had a can of my garbage, took it out of the garbage bag, brought it to my apartment, and said, "This is not burnable."
mm,
It was interesting to me, and at that time we didn't really recycle in America either,
okay,
so
yeah.
it was still kind of new to me. um but I learned the system, and like they say, when in Rome. So I paid attention to the charts they gave me, and I knew on this day I have to have my newspapers there, on that day I have to put my bottles there, and I just had to learn the system.
Hmm. Yeah, that's actually a super great example. I hear it a lot from expats in Japan. Just how steep of a learning curve it is. It gets a little bit tedious at times.
Yeah.
Um, your neighbors, they're just trying to be helpful, but obviously when they see a foreigner moving in the area, Japanese people all know how it works, but because you're clearly not from around here, um, they may try to just make sure that you're doing it correctly, because ultimately everybody pays the price if it's incorrect. So
Yes.
try not to
Yes.
get too annoyed if they start bringing your
Right.
trash back. They're just
Yeah.
trying to help.
Yep.
Just be patient and do your best and
Right.
ask
That's
for help
right.
if you
Yep.
need it. Yeah.
Yep.
So, do you have any other advice for people who are just trying to cope? Maybe people who are more introverted or just more prone to homesickness? Do you have any advice about that?
One thing I tell my students when we go, don't go to McDonald's.
Mm,
Go to 7-Eleven. Let's go to 7-Eleven and eat lunch. Because I'm
yes.
going to tell you what, 7-Elevens in Japan are
Amazing.
amazing, right? Oh my gosh, fresh. That's the first word I tell my students is fresh. That's how I describe it. Everything is fresh. You've got rice balls, you've got noodles, you've got pasta, you've got sandwiches, and they're so delicious and cheap.
Hmm.
Be open-minded and just try things, explore things. If you when we go there, we do a lot of traveling to temples, but if you're there for business and you have a minute, go to the local temple, go to a shrine, go to a museum, because this is just a part of their history, and there's just so much to see over there. Take advantage of it. Keep yourself busy, and go ahead, get lost on a train, because you'll find your way back.
I have so
But
many lost train stories, so I don't even have to try. It just
great,
happens
it's
anyway.
great.
But I
And
can assure
well,
you, you do find your way back. Trust
you
me.
do.
Yeah.
And if someone falls asleep on your shoulder on the train, just leave them alone. It'll be fine.
So then, having all of these experiences, learning what you can from them, just in your experience, does it seem like the more people are curious and kind of learn these specifics, does it help tie into learning more about Japan as a whole? I found that in my experience, even stuff that's just completely unrelated to what you would expect, like, oh, this is a high context culture, low context culture, like all of these different spectrums that you place countries on, just paying attention to the details seems to go a long way to really more strongly understanding a country and what it's about. Is that true to your experience as well?
Yes. We need to understand that Japan has, since the first day they walk into their kindergarten class, they work as a team, and everything is systematic, and there's a reason for everything. and you just got to go with it. You just got to work with it and understand that it's all about keeping the harmony within their society and keeping with the flow to make things flow well. And for me, sometimes it's just watching, like at on the trains, the conductor, seeing them do what they do, to me makes no sense, but to them, it's what they do. It's their system. And I just think, wow, they've got this. They know what they're doing. They've got this figured out.
Yeah. So then kind of what would your advice be to maybe a more aggressively individualistic American going in and being like, oh, this is inefficient. This doesn't make sense. Like, this is the way that things should be doing. What would you say to that, to somebody who might be going into situations with that attitude? Maybe not intentionally, but maybe just over time getting more annoyed by the sheer number of details everybody has to pay attention to.
Right. Try not to think like an American. Try to put yourself in their shoes. Japan as a country is so much older than America. and there's a rhyme or reason for everything. And if you're feeling frustrated, just sit back and let it be. Learn from it, because maybe you can bring something that you've seen there or learn there, bring it back here with you.
Yeah, there's a reason so many business phrases like Kaizen and things like that have been adopted into American business culture of all things. It's just because it works. One culture's approach to business isn't inherently better. It's just different based on the context. So when you're dealing with certain problems, one country's approach might be more suitable. So anything you can learn just gives you more tools later on.
Yep.
That's such a great point. So then how about reverse culture shock? What was your experience of that coming home?
Yeah, it's weird coming home, because it's almost like you've gotten so used to the lifestyle in Japan that then you come home and you're like, whoa, why are they doing it that way? Whoa, wow, you're kind of loud.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, culture shock. It's a real thing. I remember when my first job was in Battle Creek, and I was talking to the secretary, and I asked her, where's the principal's office? And she told me what's around the corner. So I look at her and I bow to her.
Help me out.
But I did what I did. I had to get it out of my system and just deal with it. But yeah, it might take you a little bit to get over it, but it'll be okay.
And kind of like when you go to Japan, trying not to impose your Americanisms onto the country. It's really hard coming back to try not to impose those Japanisms that you're like, I actually like this better. We should all do this. So yeah, you can't change American culture in the same way you can't change Japanese culture. You just have to learn to accept things as they are where you are.
Yes. And be careful if you come back and start driving, because even though I didn't drive in Japan, I remember one time making a right-hand turn and I went to the left lane.
Oh no.
I was like, oh my gosh.
What am I doing?
So it's the littlest things.
Yep. Yeah, you have to be careful about your autopilot because it's been changed. So.
Yes.
So you will be more exhausted when you come back in the same way that you were kind of exhausted when you went to Japan, just because you have to actually think things through.
Right.
So just be patient with yourself.
Exactly. It'll
Give
be
yourself
okay.
grace. It will all be okay.
Yeah.
So then, are there any important lessons that people can learn from that culture shock and from adapting to a new culture? I know that you already have more of an international background, which probably went a long way to helping you be more adaptive in those situations, but are there any skills or mindsets that you think are important for people to cultivate during their time abroad?
From what I see with my students, it's a learning process, and it's like taking a class. Like you have to learn, like grammar, for example, you have to learn, you got to practice it. Same thing with culture. You just got to learn how to deal with it. And you have to make sure that you put your mindset in the right state of mind. And when you realize, oh my gosh, like I can't take this anymore, or oh my gosh, I miss this, that, and the other, like keep yourself busy, do something to get your mind off of it. And it'll be a process that'll work itself out. And before you know it, you're going to feel like you've lived there this whole time without any issues. Like it's going to work itself out.
Have you seen a marked difference between your students' reactions? Like maybe this is just an example, I'm not sure if it relates, but students who might tend to have more of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, if those approaches seem to have different results when people go to Japan?
I've seen a difference from before we go to Japan to after we come back from Japan.
Okay.
When we come back from Japan, my students are more open-minded, and so many of them want to go back. But it's not just for their friends, it's for the system. Look, the trains in Japan, they're always on time.
Yes.
If they're late, it's because something major happened. There's a reason why when you go to the store and they give you the tray for the money, so you can put your money on that little tray. That's part of their system. And my students come back thinking, Sensei, I wish we had this in America like they did in Japan. And I love to see and hear these stories, these comparisons that they have, because to me that shows they learned. And yeah, they're definitely a lot more open-minded and just want to go back, want to keep traveling. They want to keep learning. A lot of them tell me, oh, I'm going to go to college and improve my Japanese, and I'm going to go back to Japan and speak only in Japanese.
Oh, wow.
And just that motivation, it just makes me so happy.
Yeah, that has to be the best thing to hear as a teacher.
Yes.
So those, that change in mindset, is that mostly a personality thing, or does it kind of bleed into how they approach studying and learning? I know that you're a Japanese teacher, but I don't know if you have any insight into how your students come back and approach other subjects that they learn in school.
At least for Japanese, the students that have gone to Japan, they try even harder when they continue on with my class to learn more. And it's funny when we learn certain vocab, they'll be like, oh my gosh, I had this in Japan, or I heard that in Japan, and they kind of bring it back to their time in Japan, and the connections is just amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting how much more learning a language, we're learning more about how people acquire language, and it's much more of a circular process than it is a linear process.
Yes.
Which ironically is more fitting with kind of the stereotype of how Japanese people think versus Americans think.
Right.
They tend to be very linear, they're more contextual and going back, coming back. So yeah, that's always been super interesting to me too. So if you go to Japan, you don't have language skills that you want. It's still not a waste, because your brain stores away those little nuts for later. So then when you see it, when you're learning, it'll then make those connections.
Yes.
So people shouldn't be discouraged if they don't have time to learn before they go, because they'll still gain skills. Yeah.
No, it's amazing what you pick up when you're in a country that you don't speak the language. Even just the simple konnichiwa, arigato. It's just your mind learns things, hears things, and remembers it, and you're able to use it in different situations. And again, in Japan, English is taught K-12, so I'm not saying every single person speaks it, but a lot of people speak English.
Yeah, and another thing about that is, I know it feels kind of weird and gross sometimes, but if you know katakana, you kind of know the phonetic alphabet of Japanese.
Yes.
After time, you can kind of figure out how a Japanese person would pronounce specific English words. So you can even just kind of Japanize English words, and then a lot of times they'll understand what you're saying because they learned it. They just may not have the language skills to, because like producing and hearing are two different skills. So
Right.
if
Yep.
somebody seems to not understand anything, they can probably actually pick up a lot more than you think. So don't
Exactly.
be shy.
Agreed.
So do you have any examples of a cultural communication breakdown in Japan?
For me, I can't think of one right now, but there is one with a student of mine that stands out.
Okay.
We went to our sister school in Chiba, and she was in her host family, and she was telling her host father, because they had asked her about taking a shower, and she said, well, I like to shower in the morning. And he lectured her how in Japan they shower at night, they bathe at night.
Mhm.
And so that she came back to school the next day, and she was very flustered and frustrated, and was kind of embarrassed and didn't know how to handle it. And I said, that's a perfect example of a cultural difference. And I told her, I said, you just talk to your host sister at the time and just explain to her. For the most part, the Japanese are like, fine, you want to take a shower in the morning, go right ahead.
Mhm.
But this host father could have very well just been more traditional.
Mhm.
And I let her take care of it because this is the learning experience that she needed.
Mhm.
So I just told her, you need to just go back and just talk to your host sister and talk to your host father. And she did, and everything was fine. It's
So
just you
would
have to advocate for yourself.
Yes, definitely. That's a whole other skill, is kind of trying to navigate
Yeah.
advocating for yourself to an extent. Because
Yes.
it's not about like trying to make yourself Japanese. It's learning about Japanese culture so that you can be more effective when you're in
Right.
it.
Yep.
Like, there's a very big distinction there. You don't have to not be American. You have to be a sensitive American in Japan. You just can't
Yes.
bulldoze everybody else with your ideas. So
Exactly.
there's definitely some nuance there. So if you knew one of your students like studied Japanese in high school with you, it kind of fell to the wayside for a
Mhm.
few years, and then they get in contact with you and say, hey, I'm actually going to go to Japan for business, maybe as more of a long-term expat or
Mhm.
just for a business trip. And they just want you to teach them something about the culture that will be most effective for them once they get there. What would you tell them to know or be aware of when they go to Japan?
I would just tell them to be open-minded,
Mm.
and just keep in mind that the Japanese are good people and they want to help, and to reach out if they have any issues. That's a tough question.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, there's a lot I would want to tell them, but I guess open-mindedness is the first thing that would come to mind, because like we had mentioned, you don't want anyone to go there just with the American state, the American mind, and like, I'm American and this is how we do it in America. You need to go and respect their culture and the way they do things. So you need to be open-minded and learn from that.
What do you think the best way is for somebody to try to cultivate that more open-mindedness? Just because the stereotype for Americans is just that we're
Right.
not exactly culturally curious. We're a very big country of
Right.
largely one language, one culture. Obviously,
Right.
there's exceptions, but as a whole country, it's not like Europe where you drive an hour and then all of a sudden you're somewhere else completely with a different language. How would you advise somebody who maybe has limited intercultural experiences to try to cultivate that?
I would tell them to just watch before doing anything. For example, you're at the train station. You don't know you don't know where to get your ticket from. You don't know how to get your ticket, what to do with it. Watch the Japanese people, look at what they do, and learn from that. So sit back, look around, look what's around you, watch the people, what they're doing, and then follow what they're doing and do what you need to get done.
And also, if somebody ends up kind of embarrassing themselves doing a major faux pas in the country, Do you have any insight into kind of coping with that embarrassment? I know it's just hard when you've been in a very homogenous area to all of a sudden just have absolutely no idea what's the right thing, and then have maybe people laugh at you for doing something silly. Do you have any advice about coping with that kind of embarrassment? Because I know for me it was kind of traumatizing the first few times.
I'm sure when I was in high school, when I went, it probably would have been traumatizing for me then. But now I tend to just laugh at my own mistakes, because how else are you going to learn? You got to make your mistakes. You're going to learn from your mistakes.
Yes.
I know it might be embarrassing, but you know what? Tomorrow's a new day. They're going to forget about this. You're going to forget about it. Just keep moving on and keep exploring and learning and doing what you're doing in Japan.
That's probably one of the stronger, I guess, transferable skills that you learn going to another country is just learning how to learn, learning how to adapt, and then learning how to not take yourself so seriously.
Right.
Because it's so hard. It's just so hard to learn if you think you already know everything. It just doesn't work.
Right.
So in my opinion, I feel like that's one of the reasons why people who have lived abroad, have cross-cultural experiences, tend to have such higher rankings when it comes to social skills, communication skills, more nuanced thinking. That's probably, in my opinion, that's probably one of the big sources, is just those transferable skills you gain living abroad. All right. So is there anything that you'd like to mention to my listeners about Japan? Something you're most maybe excited about when it comes to Japanese culture? Or
if you have the chance, if you have the opportunity, take it. You will not regret it. It's amazing. Japan's an amazing country. It's a beautiful country. The food is amazing. And like I said, you can get from very cheap lunches at 7-Eleven to fine dinners. There's a great range, and there's vending machines everywhere, so you will never go thirsty. And just take it all in.
That's how you learn. That's how you grow. That's how you get the most out of it. So I think that will wrap up our conversation for today. Thank you so much for your time. It was great to talk to you, hear about your experiences, hear about what you're doing with Japan and your students. Your students are so blessed to have you as their teacher, because you clearly care not only about them, but about the subject you're teaching, and you're willing to invest so much in them. So just thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation. I know that we touched on a lot of different topics, so be sure to let me know if there's a specific one you would like this podcast to dig more deeply into the future, by either sending an email or leaving a voice message. You can find information on how to do both of those things in the description of this episode. And don't forget to email me if you'd like access to my Japanese study cheat sheet as well. But for now, remember that the more you learn, the more confident you will become as you explore all of the opportunities Japan has to offer you. So, if you found the information here today useful, please subscribe for more Japanese language and cultural guidance. And if you enjoy the podcast and want to hear more content in the future, please consider leaving a review. It really helps other people find the show. And of course, if you have any other questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes or interview topics, please email me at businesssuccessjapan@gmail.com. Until next time, mata kondo!